Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us live today as we discuss the future of work, effectively managing remote teams, with B+H Insurance Director of Human Resources, Maria Clyde. My name is Elise Bortolato with the Emerging Enterprise Center, a nonprofit business incubator, part of the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce, located on the Wilmington waterfront. Today, we are talking about the future of work. The McKinsey Global Institute recently came out with an analysis on how the COVID-19 pandemic has set into motion a structural shift in where work takes place. As part of this analysis, they found that executives anticipate operating their businesses with a hybrid model, with employees working remotely and from the office, especially since they're seeing an increase in productivity. So with that, I am very grateful to have human resource expert Maria Clyde here today to share her expert advice on how to effectively manage your teams, remote or in person. So we're going to be talking about those tools that you need for this structural shift in how we are working. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an important topic right now. So I'm very grateful to be here. Things are changing very quickly with COVID. So I'm happy to have this discussion with everyone.
Oh, with that, actually, we want you to be part of the discussion. So feel free to throw any questions or comments you might have on this topic into the comment section below. And we'll make sure we'll get to those as we kind of go through this presentation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, I have a general agenda here that I want to go through, that I want to address as COVID has changed things so drastically for us in the last year or so. But please, this is meant to be a discussion. I want to hear from you all. Feel free to interrupt me with questions. Elise as well, interrupt me with things. We're here to talk about how things are changing, right? And things are changing very, very rapidly. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Of course, this is my contact information. I'm also on LinkedIn, very active. I try to post things from SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. A lot of things that, of course, again, things are changing very, very quickly now. So feel free to reach out to me either using this contact information or through LinkedIn. So what I kind of want to address today, and again, I'm going to be kind of jumping around, but I think a lot of what we're here to discuss is, of course, we're talking about effectively managing remote teams, but let's also talk about effectively managing teams in general, period, whether or not they're in person or remote. So and a couple of people who have done HR consulting with me or who have worked with me in that capacity know that I'm very, very big on communication. I think the foundation of good HR, of good human resources, is communication. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today can really be applied to whether you're communicating in person or whether you're communicating remote. A lot of that has to do with DISC. So I use DISC assessments. They're behavioral and communication style assessments, as you can see my little graphic up there. But keep this in mind. We're gonna talk about DISC and how that can be a really, really great tool for you to use when managing your team, whether in person or remote. But before we get there, I kind of want to set this stage here about communication and how COVID and the stress of the last year or so, the constant change, the fear of the unknown, has really transformed the way people communicate. So it was much easier back in, we'll say, the beginning of March 2020 and the end of February 2020 to communicate with our teammates if we were working down the hallway from them, right? We had a lot of what was called these organic discussions of, by the way, that project that we're working on, yes, I made such and such a call and you don't have to worry about that. Or remember, I asked you to do this and now you don't have to worry about it. I took care of it. So there was a lot of that going on. COVID hits. People are under a tremendous amount of stress with not knowing what's going on. And if you think back to how you felt in March of 2020, the initial communication was, okay, we're going to be shut down for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe, right? So this whole thought that this was going to be kind of a blip in the radar, and that, okay, we're going to get past this. We're just going to have to make these temporary adjustments, and then we'll be back to normal. Well, March passed, and then April passed, and then we thought, okay, things will be better by summer, and they weren't. And here we are, over a year later, and we're still in this pandemic, and we're still trying to deal with this. I point that out to everybody because I think this level of stress that people were under with COVID and with this unknown has really changed people's communication styles. People are just more on edge right now. And I want to just kind of call attention to that fact that this whole idea of we couldn't manage our employees' expectations. And I've said this before, one of the keys of managing and communicating with our team is managing our employees' expectations. And we really couldn't do that in the last year. And I don't think we can still do that. So with that in mind, keep in mind that the amount of stress that people are under and the fact that we have to work a lot harder to keep morale up. Another thing that I want to mention here is I'm not sure if anybody has ever heard of what's called the Stockdale Paradox. Bear with me, but
I have not.
You have not. Okay, so this is something this comes from actually Jim Collins, who is he's a business leader, writer. He wrote books called Built to Last and Good to Great. So there was a Vietnam prisoner of war, Jim Stockdale, and he was, I don't know exactly how long he was a prisoner of war, but he mentions the fact that the people who had the worst time and who really didn't make it out of these camps were the optimists. And bear with me. So I get that, we're trying to manage morale, we're trying to be optimistic here, but what the Stockdale Paradox is, and when I say the optimists, I mean people who said, okay, we'll be out by Christmas, and then they weren't out by Christmas. So some people died of a broken heart, right? This is a quote directly from Jim Collins about the Stockdale Paradox. This is a very, very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. To this day, I carry that mental image of Stockdale admonishing the optimists, we're not getting out by Christmas, deal with it. So I bring this to your attention because Jim Collins actually did a really great presentation about this when the COVID pandemic first started, of reminding our business leaders that we have to deal with some brutal facts of reality, right? The way that we communicated and worked and managed our teams have changed and will probably never be the same. So we're gonna deal with that. We're going to be realists. We're going to try and manage morale. Of course, everybody wants to be optimistic about things, but we want to still keep these facts into reality, okay? So I bring this up, of course, because one of the foundations of DISC and measuring people's behavior and communication styles is being able to anticipate how people are going to respond under stress. I've seen a lot of this, and oftentimes their natural style is magnified. So if someone tends to be a real driver, a dominance type of person, that kind of loss of control amidst the stress that this COVID pandemic puts on us is going to take that and it's going to exacerbate it. Okay, some of our steady folks, that green, who maybe were kind of introverted or quiet before, now may become extremely withdrawn. So I point this out to recognize this in your teams and being able to anticipate some of these exacerbated behavior and communication styles amongst your teams, anticipating it and knowing how to work with it. Because what we're all trying to get to is good, productive workplace communication, whether we're remote or not. But now the fact that you throw in this remote curveball and you have this work-life blend of things, it's not a balance anymore. Let's just get rid of the word balance, right? It's a blend, and so many lines are being blurred with that personal and work life blend, and it's adding even more stress to people. So it's kind of keeping that in mind, and the fact that this stress and the Stockdale Paradox of managing whatever expectations we possibly can while still being realists here, I think is something very, very important that we should all recognize as managers and as leaders. So what I also want to point out too is that DISC assessments are an exercise in self-awareness as well. So knowing what your own communication style is relative to your team's communication style, and then having your team know where all the other teammates are plotted. And I'm drawing a wheel with my hands because the DISC assessments that I use plot our teams on a wheel, and we can kind of see where people are, whether or not they complement each other, whether or not they're similar. And usually people who are opposite each other on the wheel are completely opposite styles. But again, it's kind of realizing that and knowing where your people are, and then understanding that these are different times and much more stressful times, and things are just going to be exacerbated. People are going to be more on edge. People are going to maybe think the worst of things. And it's our job as leaders to recognize this and to be able to manage this type of communication with our employees. So let's talk real quick about communication and workplace communication. DISC aside, now that some of our employees are remote or maybe hybrid, or they're coming in and out, we have to remember that we have to be proactive and deliberate and pretty regular with our communication. And dare I also say, over communicate with our employees. And the reason why I say over communicate, and whatever that looks like for your organization, of course, is going to be different, right? Daily check-ins, maybe every other day, at least weekly, I would recommend if you have a fully remote team, because again, this goes back to our whole idea of managing expectations and managing our team and being proactive. If we're not communicating ourselves as leaders, even if the communication is, hey, I don't have an update for this, or everybody okay, let's check in, this personal check-in, we don't have anything work related to discuss. If we do not touch base with these people, with the people that we're managing, employees may fill the gap of communication with their own sort of assumptions about things, which reference my conversation earlier about COVID and stress, and unfortunately, a lot of the negativity that's been going on. Whatever they fill that communication gap with, probably maybe negative, right? So we want to get ahead of that. And again, this isn't to say that, trust me, I'm not a pessimistic person. I tend to be more of an optimist when it comes to things. This is just confronting brutal facts, right? We are anticipating this. The fact that people are under stress, they have a million different things to do. We're balancing home life, work life, and everything else. And people are getting sick and managing exposures and the fear of exposures. And do I get the vaccine? Do I not get the vaccine? How do I talk to my doctor? All these types of things. Knowing that and knowing the stress that people are under should make us as managers, certainly, it should push us to be more proactive communicators right now. So with that in mind, let's kind of talk about this. I call this my sort of my communication triangle here. 3 very, very important elements of communication. And the fact that our remote work world has really transformed this. Okay, so the first is we have words, right? So our emails, our texts, our messages, our Slacks, our Microsoft Teams messages, all of these things. Words, and it seems like it's been easier to just send a quick text to get things done. And I get that. That's the whole reason why we have these types of quick communication tools. But let's also keep in mind that with words, the people that you are sending your message to may not be able to tell what your tone is, right? So we've all heard, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Let's keep in mind that when we're in a remote world, if we're not picking up the phone, if we're sending out a quick memo or whatever it is, we may lack the tone. The people who we're communicating with may not know the tone that we intend to deliver. Okay, so let's just kind of keep that in mind. Then the third and possibly the most important element of communication is body language. Really, you can only kind of see my face here. You can see my hands going. I'm a high I in my disc. It's influential. I'm a people person. One of the qualities of a high I is they talk with their hands, so you can kind of see my hands going here. Body language is so extremely important, and facial expressions, of course, that go along with that. Our Zoom and our video chats have been great for preserving what sort of body language that may be missing from an in-person interaction. But please keep in mind, as you're managing your remote or hybrid teams, that when you convey a message, think about the importance of the message, think about how it may be received, and the fact that people are under stress right now, so it may be negatively perceived, and think about whether or not that message should be delivered in person, if you can safely do so, via Zoom, so people can see your facial expressions and body language, whether or not it's okay and it can just constitute a text or a quick message or a quick email, or whether or not you have to pick up the phone. Okay, so this is all about figuring out what type of workplace communication is going to be most productive given the situation, given the stress and the tensions that are running high, given the personality and communication and behavioral styles of the people on your team who you're managing or who you're working with. Okay, so again, we're about productive communication. Just keep this in mind, the fact that body language and tonality may get lost in translation while we're managing our remote teams and while we're trying to communicate. We're trying to be better communicators here during this time. And just remember that we need to keep those things in mind when we're moving really quickly throughout our team meetings or what have you. Something I of course wanted to point out to people, because people don't realize that really words are only about 30% of the message that we intend to deliver. So think about that, right? If 70% is tonality and body language, and we're just firing off emails to people or messages, things are going to get lost in translation and people are automatically going to think the worst. All right. So keep that in mind when you're communicating. Think, okay, is this better on a Zoom or on an in-person if I can safely do so rather than on the phone or an email?
I know our team has used so many collaboration tools such as Microsoft Teams, where it is easy to kind of jump onto that video to kind of share that message. So that's really important piece. I love that you said thinking about how you are communicating whatever you need to communicate.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing to keep in mind there too, and I know we're trying to save time right now because we're doing a ton of stuff at home. We're balancing so many different things. So it's like, all right, I'll just send this email. By the time you compose the email, You could have picked up the phone, or you could have just requested, hey, do you have 5 minutes to talk via Teams? And just think about that. That sometimes the fact that the email is meant to be a time saver, or the messaging app is meant to be a time saver, but sometimes it just takes more time to type it out or compose the message or whatever. So I just say, when in doubt, I pick up my phone all the time. It's just easier. Or I request a video chat whenever I can, just because it just, in the end, that really is the quickest way to do it. So keeping that in mind, as you have people remote or hybrid or what have you, then you got to think about the whole kind of trust of this type of scenario. Out of sight may mean, for some people, out of mind, right? Giving people the benefit of the doubt and the grace to understand that if they don't get back to you within 5 minutes or whatever the expected response time is, and maybe that's what you need to establish with your team. If your team is entirely remote, and this is in order to avoid the type of animosity or resentment that might build up amongst the team if they don't know where their other teammates are, that, they're not sitting right next to each other anymore. But the fact that saying, okay, I understand that people are multitasking during the day, but I want to set the expectation that you should not let no more than 2 hours, let's say, pass before you are checking back in or going back and checking your messages. Whatever that looks like for you, again, we're proactively communicating what these expectations are, because we want to avoid the trust amongst our team eroding with people being out of sight, out of mind. Encouraging people to speak up and talk to each other if they feel that if a team member is not becoming trustworthy.
So this kind of goes back to why we wanted to make sure that we're having this sharing these tools to help people who are managing remote teams. There is going to be this, COVID has forced a shift in our workplace, and it's only increased the trend for more hybrid or remote working, especially because teams have been found to be very productive. There has been a lot of positives that have come through this. And I do feel like I wanted to stress this point and kind of maybe ask some questions around this.
Sure.
It is a mind shift for a lot of managers, companies, where their employees are technically out of their site, not virtual site, but physical site. So are you seeing any, have you noticed any positive, like on top of just checking, making sure that there's some kind of policy for how you're responding to messages, when are those, what your expectations are? Are you seeing any positive, or have you seen any positive ways that people you've worked with have solved these issues for their internal teams?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of this is also going to depend too on how cohesive the team and the unit was, or what the culture was before going into the pandemic as well. Just kind of keeping that in mind. There are certainly organizations who have done a really great job at still preserving their culture. And I think we all need to really ask ourselves, okay, what defines our culture? If we are shifting now to this remote work environment, how can we still preserve our culture and what we think is important while we're remote? And I think, of course, that answer is going to be different for every organization, depending on what the industry is, depending on how big the team is, how geographically dispersed people are. But what I will say too is I've noticed a lot, especially in Delaware. So I work with primarily Delaware small businesses. The remote work idea has been very difficult for people to grasp because of that whole trust and the lack of control, and that the lack of control rather for managers kind of and leaders. Again, this goes back to DISC, and this is a self-awareness thing. You as a manager know that this is really bothering you and it's not going anywhere, right? So we're facing our brutal facts. We're going to figure out a way to make it work, and kind of having an open discussion with either your fellow management team. I definitely recommend that. That's a good idea. Really talking about culture and, okay, how are we going to preserve this remote, if we're remote now in this remote work environment, and having all of your managers get on the same page about certain expectations and talking about your culture, I think can be very beneficial. And then having the managers then meet with their teams to have an open discussion, a two-way conversation about this, about maybe some of the challenges that people are experiencing working remotely, if they're having trouble getting a hold of people. And again, it's just further solidifying this whole trust idea of this. But managers, you first recognizing if you're having a hard time facing these brutal facts and realizing, okay, remote work is here to stay, then we got to work on a way to accept it and move forward and make the best of what the situation is right now. And again, I know it's hard, and especially because a ton of people that I work with are very traditional people that you come to work, right? You come to work, you walk in the door, we have a different feel here, it's a different mindset. Well, if that's not possible right now, let's figure out another way to make it work. Let's come up with solutions, not excuses, kind of. And in a nice way to kind of say that. We're finding a way, not a roadblock. Easier said than done, of course, because you're managing attitudes too. You're managing people's productivity, you're managing all of these things and trying to make sure that work gets done. And actually, that's a good point too, is let's talk about if there is a performance issue or if someone is not pulling their weight as part of the team, if they are remote. That is absolutely something that you need to address immediately. And that is a one-on-one conversation with someone. Hey, I noticed that you missed 1, 2, 3 deadlines that then affected the customer, or I received word from the customer or the vendor or what have you, that you're hard to get a hold of. What's going on? Is there anything that I can help you? I want to talk about these performance issues and you kind of got to get it documented too, because no matter what, at the end of the day, we still have a job to do and we're still making sure that things are getting done. But the moment that we have performance issues, we have to address them immediately. And of course, in HR world, we document the fact that we address it immediately, because if the person is not performing their job duties, whether they're remote or in the office, then we use our progressive disciplinary procedure. And ultimately, you may have to part ways with that employee due to performance issues. What's important now is that we're giving people the benefit of the doubt and having a conversation about it, because let me also go a little bit on the legal end here too. With COVID and the fact that this is a medical pandemic here we're talking about, there's this thing called the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, which our employees, we want to reasonably accommodate our employees. And this whole idea of remote work has been a reasonable accommodation for folks. Now, again, this goes back to if the employee is not fulfilling the essential functions of their job, then maybe this accommodation of them working remotely is no longer reasonable. But you have to have that interactive process with the employee, because there could be other underlying medical conditions. Maybe they're a caretaker, could be other disability issues. You just have to have a discussion about it.
Perfect.
All right. So I'm going to keep moving along here. We're going to address some DISC stuff. But again, this whole idea of communication, I can't stress it enough. Even before this COVID pandemic, I was saying HR, the foundation of good HR is communication. 90% of workplace conflict results from a lack of communication or miscommunication. So with that in mind, let's talk about kind of this idea of self-awareness real quick as it applies to DISC. So this goes back to kind of knowing yourself and knowing what your communication style is. You have this unconscious gap, right? You have no idea that you may withdraw if you're under stress. You have no idea that you may be a little too assertive under stress. It's brought to your attention and you realize, okay, maybe I didn't approach that in the right way. Maybe my communication wasn't as productive as it should be. So you realize that you have some work to do, right? At that point, you make the effort to be consciously competent. You practice, 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 stopping and thinking before you speak and act without letting your natural communication style kind of overtake you, and realizing, okay, is my communication in this particular situation going to be productive? Then you practice it so much that you become unconsciously competent, and you're doing a very good job at managing your natural behavioral communication style for the particular situation or who you might be working with. Again, this whole idea of self-awareness, now is a really good time for you to reflect on this last year, to think about, okay, how well did I do under stress? How well did I manage? Did I lead well? Did I keep my own emotions and things in check? And I'll be honest, I didn't at some points. As leaders, and especially as HR people, we're supposed to be the steady force, the cool, calm, collected. People come to us with crazy stuff and we're like, okay, we'll figure it out. And there were certain times where I didn't know if I could figure it out. Take this opportunity to reflect and be self-aware about yourself, and encourage your teammates to do so as well. Because, again, this whole idea of DISC is then knowing where you kind of fall on this behavioral continuum. D is for dominance. That's our and I liken them to birds. So eagle, the really assertive, kind of a lot of CEOs are going to be drivers. Your influencers, that's going to be a lot of our HR people, the parrots, the people, the very enthusiastic folks, the people who talk with their hands, that's me. Steady, our doves, very relaxed, patient. And then our compliance people are owls, are very detail-oriented, very exacting type of people. Facts are facts, analytical.
Do you ever encourage teams to have these behavioral assessments with each other?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because self-awareness, step number 1, and then self-awareness relative to the rest of your team, and the way that your team, if you're a D and you have to work very frequently with an S, I'm telling you, there's going to be some conflict there. So again, we're kind of plucking ourselves out of this whole situation in this last year and reflecting on this. Mm-hmm. Same way we would do for DISCs. This is the exercise, the self-awareness exercise of knowing how we communicate relative to the situation, relative to our team, and maybe thinking back, okay, I probably could have handled that a little bit better. I know
we've all had those moments.
I'm sorry, say that again.
We've all had those moments.
Absolutely. But that continuum, right? It's making the decision to be consciously competent and wanting to practice and be better in these types of situation. And again, going back to what I addressed immediately with this, COVID and stress, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a lot harder for us to keep our natural reactions and natural styles in check when we're under a tremendous amount of stress, when we don't know what is going on with anything, when we don't know are we going to be in this for another year? What's summer going to look like? Should I get the vaccine? Can I go see my grandparents? All these types of things. Knowing this and knowing where your team is, I'm sure if your team does these types of DISC assessments, it'll explain a lot. And you'll think, oh, that's why such and such always asks me for that spreadsheet, because they're a high compliance person. They want to see the numbers and the facts and the data. It's going to explain a lot of things. And I think it's going to be a very helpful tool for people to use. So with that in mind, I have a couple more DISC kind of helpful slides. Should I work through those, or do we have any other questions that are coming through?
So we don't have any questions coming through, so feel free to start working through those. But okay. I do encourage anyone who is interested in asking a question or sharing just an experience that Maria can maybe talk on, please feel free to throw that into the comments.
Yeah, so these are great because, again, this is relative to your team, seeing where all your team members fit on this DISC plot. D's are looking for results. I's are looking for interaction. The pandemic was the worst thing to happen to us I's. We were like, oh my gosh, I miss people. Probably have a few of those social butterflies on your team, right? Whereas with the S's and C's, who are maybe a little bit more on the introverted side, they were like, oh yeah, work from home. This is great.
I feel like I'm one of those people that are a little bit of both.
Yes.
So I definitely, when I need silence to be productive. And when I say silence, I mean, for the past over a year that we've been working, I don't have a radio. I don't have a TV. I have no sound in my house. But on the other hand, I do miss interactions with folks, but my productivity does go up with absolute silence.
Yep. And you bring up an important point here, is that most of the time when people take these DISC assessments, they may be one or two styles. Like you may see it's pretty high or low. Even the lower styles are pretty evident, but it's the blend of all four of these that makes you and makes you unique. But it just helps with overall team building and knowing where your teammates fall, just to help you better communicate with them.
And I actually, Bob Buechner, who's the director of economic development here at the chamber, just said he found a free DISC assessment online. If you want to look in the comments of this video, you can do that with, if you're interested in knowing where you kind of sit. I'm sure Maria probably has other resources that she can share with you of how to assess yourself or
Yes.
with your teams.
Yep. So I use a tool called TTI, Talent Target. Hold on. I have to get the acronym for you, but it's basically Talent Insights. So I can absolutely give people a sample if they're looking, if they want to do that. The other piece, and I'm not even going to get into this, but the other piece of the DISC assessments that I use look at motivators and what's underneath the surface.
Food is a big motivator for me. So
yeah. So it's really interesting to see what their behavioral styles are, but then what's underneath the surface of why we do what we do, because that can be really telling for people. And again, this is about knowing your team. If you're not going to be in an office with them day to day anymore, let's know everything we possibly can about them, how they like to communicate, how they like to be communicated with. So the foundation of this DISC stuff, like I was saying, self-awareness. But you've heard the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. I say scratch that and go with communicate with others how they want to be communicated with. That's the really, really important piece now. Think about that. And think in your own team too. If you had to deliver bad news to somebody, and just thinking of your current team members, you're probably going to address that differently with your different team members. And knowing that maybe your communication style, like especially me being like a people person and trying to break the ice, talking to a high C compliance person or a high dominance person, they want you to get to the point and get to the facts straight. So my kind of enthusiastic fluff, or whatever we want to call it in the beginning while I'm introducing this, probably not going to be the best way for me to go about this. But it's just kind of knowing that and having the awareness of where your team is at relative to you, I think can be really, really important. And then, of course, just a couple of, I have some tips when communicating with DISC. But the biggest thing, and this is back to our whole idea of COVID, bring us back to this idea of stress and how it has really transformed workplace communication. Fear, right? So thinking about what our employees are afraid of, and there's a lot of stuff that people are probably afraid of right now. But if you're looking at it through the eyes of DISC, dominance folks are that fear of losing control and being taken advantage of. Your influencer people are the fear of not being liked. Your steady people are that loss of security and frequent change, which, of course, the only thing constant right now is change. So those people are probably having more of a rough time with this. So check in on those folks. And then your compliance people, the fear of making mistakes. So again, with that in mind and knowing where your teammates fall, you can sort of get ahead of a lot of this stuff and anticipate maybe some communication issues that you may have with your team. Like I said, either in person or remote, but especially remote, because we have to be much more deliberate with our communication. We have to over communicate, and we have to think a lot more about how we're going to be productive, because we're not right next to each other, and sometimes we don't have the ability to express our body language and our tone because we're remote. So thinking about that.
Absolutely. No, I think we all thought as a team it was important to do a conversation around this, share tools for those managers that are managing remote teams. It's been a year. It's been a lot of change for the team, for companies, for managers. So we're all kind of stretching in different ways. And we wanted to make sure we're giving tools and advice that will help teams better communicate and be more productive and happy, especially knowing that as the McKinsey Institute came out with their analysis, the COVID pandemic has forced a shift in how we are working and where we are working. So like you said, getting on top of things, it's being proactive, making these internal changes to ourselves, our processes that are going to be important and imperative.
Definitely. And we're at a point now where, especially with the vaccine being rolled out, and we talked about return to work. I actually did a presentation on return to work back in June, I think, of last year, because that's what we thought, right? Like, right. Okay, things are getting better. And then boom, Memorial Day hit, and it was like, downhill from there. We're not ready. And I think we're going to keep seeing these waves. But if you are going to consider, again, return to work or remote work, it's not a bad idea maybe to kind of start from scratch on your policies. And again, communicating that expectation with your employees of, hey, we have to relook at our work from home schedule here. If you do want to start phasing people back in, whether that's a rotating schedule or rotating days or what that's going to look like, I've recommended to a lot of my clients that, okay, we're going to start from scratch here. Let's look at this. If you want to start phasing people back in and what this is going to look like, but also be ready for that to come to a halt if numbers continue to rise and we are still dealing with this, and then we have to go backwards of entirely.
You and I had kind of talked about this a little bit prior to our conversation, and it's about this retention of talent, or the opportunities of the retention of talent with this new remote work. Is there anything that you have worked with on your clients on this portion about what this means for talent and retaining talent?
Finding talent right now has been very, very difficult for many of my clients. So what I challenge employers to consider is, do you need to look outside the Delaware area or this area for labor for fully remote employees? And I have a couple of clients who did that and have had great success with it because they went into it with certain policies, establishing the expectation for work from home and what that means, and telling the existing team, so maybe they have a team that is half in person or what have you, hey, we really need some help. We have to go outside the geographical labor market here. We're going to pull on a fully remote teammate. Communication expectations remain the same, or maybe we have to over communicate with this person if they are remote, but they're still going to be a part of this team and we're still going to welcome them into our culture. That has certainly happened, but it's not the right decision for every business, but I encourage you all to consider that if you're having trouble specifically recruiting people in this area.
And and based on the analysis that I had read, like over 20% of jobs are able to be almost fully remote, which is why this is becoming such a major shift and why companies do need to put in place policies. You can create these communication exercises with their teams. Yep. I love the self-awareness. I love the DISC assessment. I've personally never taken one. So those, again, who are tuning in, check the comments. We had put some resources around DISC assessment. I also encourage everyone who is tune in or wants to learn more, I also linked to an article that Maria had wrote for Delaware Business Time on this topic. Please feel free to read the article. She gave more tools and tips for this effective remote work. And then I also encourage you to connect with her on LinkedIn. Stay connected, reach out to her, make sure that your teams are getting the support and communication that they need. So I know you have a hard stop at 12:45, so I want to just thank you so much for your time today, sharing all of your expertise and knowledge. And I encourage everyone to reach out to Maria if they have questions, or if there's their business can maybe use some assessment and help through this process. We'll say it's a process because it's going to be a little bit more ongoing.
Absolutely. And that with that, the final thing I'll say is these policies and the processes and managing expectations and what this is going to look like is going to change. Living documents, we got to keep looking at this because the only thing that's constant right now is change, and it is what it is. Just got to do it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for joining in, and thank you for taking part of this conversation, Maria, with us. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.